Yeda Namdara Jinye Dungun Jejen Zenjir Yeje Doga Lebonzen Kanda Zebe Zeramare Mondon Dongal Jezerve Drozo Gola Doje Darz Yela Droju Yadezo Droda Jendro Nyomo Nyelo Leje Jadro Drunzeji Mare Monze Donga Nyungu Jinye Jude Radena Dene Daje Saju Darle Yude Luzo Jaze Doveku Juda Juda Junye Dendre Dale Monzen Jan Yalandu Marabazamandine. Marabazanande Sede Jera Vezeredi Ale Demo Marazani Kana Denju Jolo Domai Loje Bobe Nawa Zandozu Kanze Davar Deba Jonze Jewar Denai Kumbu Jamyan Denyin Keme Baryan Donwar Shu Laso Tine Chanju Shudu Tudi Be Kulunge Saldam December Shu Ninda De La Kanje Sambar Chave Chudi Rimbani Ni Lungda Tobe Cheni Yubinane Ni Lungi Chue Imbare De La Kadang Tenju Ni Yubinane Tananga Zo Tenju Chang Yure Ani Tenju De La Yang Ka Toda Portungi Kongre De Zambi Tenju Rimido Sum Yubinane Ka Parve Kongre De Zambi Tenju Re De La Yang Ngwe Den Toni De Rimbe Rimba Yedene Jelwe Tenju Cheda Pedun Ngondo De Rimba Dang Jelwe Tenju Ni Yubinane Tanang Den Toni De Rimba Re De La Yang Da Rik Mungbo Yubinane Tanda Palen Dawa Dawen Zerbe Umanjoba Ta Di Jawa Me Varum Che Songdo Nga Shugi
At the beginning of class, please give rise to bodhicitta, the thought towards perfect and complete awakening, and with that kind of motivation, listen to the teachings. The text that we're studying here belongs to the scriptural Dharma from within the Dharma of Scripture and the Dharma of realization. The Dharma of Scripture can be divided into the teachings of the Buddha and the commentaries that comment on the intent of those teachings of the Buddha. Here we're concerned with a commentary, a treatise. And there are 3 cycles of teachings that the teachings might belong to. The first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. Here we are concerned with a Shastra that comments upon the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, that of the absence of characteristics. And there are 2 traditions in which one might explain the meaning of the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. There are 2 traditions, one commenting upon the direct, evident meaning expressed in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, and the second tradition is that the tradition of commenting on the hidden meaning of the Prajnaparamita. Here we are primarily following the tradition of explaining the direct meaning of the Prajnaparamita. And there are many treatises that comment upon that, and one of them is the text that we are studying. That's the Introduction to the Middle Way, the Madhyamakavatara. And specifically, we are following Mipam Rinpoche's commentary upon that text. Kimbula kananga kigas.
Allah samane ta mebaram ju songde la tsenden gyurja shungden jugudun hiyongdu ne hyongden de marashi te ta sabje re mashuna tsarwa ne ta ngazo palden dawa kharangi zebe da teba abo ta ningje chambula teba chegen le bare den nang ne da jir ningje le teba shuni kazu te samde la ni bala semje la mebe ningje la teba da chöl dang mebo mebe ningje toba ni le yu na ne ta tanda samje la mebe ningje toba cha gere 제대로 다 단다 제단 닝제 세주잖아 제단 가서 닝제 hin 동할 탈도 줄로 딜라 닝제 송조고 이래 근데 다 벌든 다와 잡아지 둘도 줄 닝제다 나도 제단의 닝제들 개발을 열어다 요 말씀 돼 열어 제가 삼진치 동할 탈도 닝제나야 닝제래 파이 파마지 보고는 동할 탈도 닝제여 봐야 나다 구글 밤에 동안 자도 인지 나라 초보 낭변조에 나라 예고 낭변조에 나라 다 소주 세송 유비 인제데 띵하랑조 제단계 인제래 그래도 단다 빨된 나와 잡에 해야 돼 닌인제데 여바 강라 단다 초그리 매반 인제 장주 선발로 거야 돼 초그리 매반 인제로 내 파마 인다며 내 보고 인다며 내 노셰 인다면서 깨져 요 말에 다 뭐시야다 마셰 여다 매선매번 루루 삼지 용조 얘네 동할자도 인제 단다 도일도 그 인제 도다 되래 인제도 인제들라 아니 되바나 로여와 되는 인제들이 가장 정말 개중보 바로 개중보 탐 개중보 송사도 왔다 되는데서 어떤 분들이 손나
The commentary on the Madhyamakavatara by Mipam Rinpoche is outlined by 4 main topics: the meaning of the title, the homage of the translator, the treatise itself, and the conclusion. And we don't really need to go into the full explanation of the outline. It is enough to here jump to the fact that we are currently concerned with Chandrakirti praising compassion. And we, first of all, can ask ourselves whether our general understanding of compassion and Chandrakirti's compassion that he's praising here are the same. What is compassion? Compassion is the thought or the wish that others may be free from suffering. And is there a difference between the compassion that Chandrakirti points out here, or that he praises here, and our general compassion? Yes. Generally, when we are compassionate, when we have this compassionate mind of wishing others to be free of suffering, then it's usually a limited type of compassion where we want our parents to be free of suffering, or our children, where we want our friends to be free of suffering, or just generally our acquaintances and so forth. But here, what Chandrakirti refers to is a more general sense of compassion towards all sentient beings, one that does not distinguish between different camps, that does not distinguish between different sides, or compassion that does not that does not focus only on one's own relatives, one's own friends, one's own acquaintances, and so forth, but a compassion that encompasses all sentient beings. So the compassion that Chandrakirti praises here is a compassion for all sentient beings without any bias or partiality. And so that is what we need to understand here. And in our last class, we spoke about the importance of compassion in a general sense. We saw that this compassion is crucial in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. And now we move on to the next session of the different kinds of great compassion.
Samjin la me be nyingje second day samjin samla ta ne ta dongal mang ba nyong te do de dongal don so le thal je tar be ko ma ta dongal le thal sa je la ne kyal ko sa le ne me lo chu wa ina ne samjin la me be nyingje second ane ta che la me be nyingje se do ne ta ngyu ta hi ta rang ro de le be lo ga shu chi ta ke ju mar wa yinanyang kasa ure, dinde judo ure. Ne samjen dinzo dinde dongal nyonga sama ase, samjen dinzo sama ya ne, dana dewa nyong shimba kabro, dongal nyong kari na, tangpa dimba chuna me ba, gyur rogurwa. Kaja sibi samu gen dewa nyong de yore, kaja tori gen dewa nyong de yore, kaja negam na dewa, ina ta di dewa de kasu bar de tegire. Tangpa dimba kaan mindo wa. 지금 교조로 닝복 하면도 초가면도 선다 된절라 되는 섬진기 동안 섬노탄은 줘야들라 네 처럼이 이제서 초지랑신 규로 초진 아바튼 메다베랑신 섬노탄에 무슨 된된 인제게 되라 처럼이 이제서 그래 아니 단미반 메베 이제서 담바랑신 맞어봐 저 탐제 오니 섬노탄나 동반이 저보다 저로 라신 칸 매버 이나 섬는 상마 덴진 텐 테로와 아 교인디 파기도 덴진 전에 테르다 디 덴진 제주된 전에 닝제께와 디 덴진다 잘 거고도 냠불로 되나니 미범이 민제 쓰기래 때더 독자나 제버때 쓰이래 아니 다 예술라 섬노다나 양 가솔레 당보 바 장에 망체지 섬진라 미베 닝제래 제일 섬진 삼 통이네 섬진 동알도 동알 잡아 두지 동알도 동알 자충부 통되는 거죠. 뭐다 디지털 거사를 냐면 로직에 용을 딘소되네 제당 섬진 가서 유만 내 손데 소소지오 소람 졸람 버도 망쳐와 티슈 좀 이렇게 두고 요래. 아니 저러면 민영제 되는 소람 전부 다 소람 내양 강점 주도 두기래 돼. 라고도 소름 링네 송대 소름 링다 첨번에 송대 아니 연자라 디린 라고도 야고게도 고요 담미밤에 벤인지 산이노 대바디 근데 사당부터 봐 연체마도 봐 소소지 올라 제마치 신도 예도 말해 너 초점 잡아지니 계도 그래 근데 저는
So we move on to the homage to different kinds of great compassion. And here it says, he then proceeds to praise first compassion that has beings for its object, second compassion that has transcends for its object, and third compassion that is devoid of reference. A different way of translating the second one here would be the compassion which observes phenomena or focuses on phenomena and characteristics. So Dharma in that sense. So when we speak about the three types of, when we speak about compassion, then here we're classifying three different kinds of compassion. Generally, the thought of may sentient beings free of suffering is the same, but there's slightly different angles that are being taken and slightly different classifications that are being made. So the first type of compassion here is the compassion that has beings for its object. It's just considering sentient beings as the object of compassion. So one observes that beings suffer, that they suffer the suffering of suffering, the suffering the suffering of change, and so forth. And one wants sentient beings to be free from suffering. One wants to liberate one wants that sentient beings are liberated from suffering. And then the second type of compassion, that is here translated as the compassion that has transience as its object, has really the same basis, right? Sentient beings are still the basis, but they don't only suffer the suffering of suffering. Sentient beings do suffer under from the suffering of change, in the sense that within samsara they might experience painful circumstances, they might also experience some pleasure, but all of this is in constant flux, it's in the constant change. And so one recognizes that beings, even though they might temporarily experience happiness, that will not continue to experience happiness, and ask oneself, how long will that hold? How long will they experience that kind of pleasure? And through that, one really understands that there's no essence within samsara, there's no true happiness to be found within samsara. There's no essence to samsara. And so considering beings and their experience to be impermanent, then one gives rise to the second type of compassion. And then the third type of compassion, the compassion that is devoid of reference, that is the recognition that beings and phenomena are empty of an inherent nature. They're empty in the sense of emptiness that is free from all conceptual elaborations. So they do not possess an inherent nature at all. But beings don't recognize that. Like normal sentient beings don't recognize that. They're grasping to true existence. And so this third type of compassion takes that as its object of compassion. So recognizing that there is no self, that phenomena are empty. This compassion focuses on beings that grasp to true existence, and so the compassionate wishes that they may be free from that grasping to true existence. And so as you see, these are not really completely different things, but slightly different aspects to compassion that we have been looking at now. And there's also a difference in the way that one might generate those kinds of compassions, or when that kind of like each of these three types of compassion might be generated. The first kind is really to recognize beings to be suffering and so forth. And so that is a compassion that might arise in anyone, in like an ordinary sentient beings who has not entered the path, may be able to generate that kind of compassion. So from an ordinary being onwards, one can really have that kind of compassion. The second type of compassion, considering the transient nature phenomena of beings, is said to be one that one can generate on the path of accumulation. So having entered the 5 paths, a little bit already on the lesser path of accumulation, but then really on the middling path of accumulation, the greater one, that's when that kind of compassion is really generated. And then the third type of compassion that is devoid of reference, that can really and completely only be generated on the first bhumi. Before that, one might have a partial understanding of it, but fully developing that kind of compassion happens from the first bhumi onwards. First comes now the homage to compassion that has beings for its object, and we are on page 146 now. Homage to compassion that has beings for its object. At first, that is, before any notion of mine can arise, there is a clinging to I, to the self that is assumed to exist. And because Khenpo is has the verse within the explanation, I also read the second verse. Beings think I at first and cling to self. They think of mine and are attached to things. They thus turn helplessly as buckets on a water wheel, and to compassion for such beings I bow down. So the nature of all phenomena is expanse, which is free from all conceptual elaborations. And beings are not able to recognize that. They are deluded with regard to that. They're ignorant of that nature of phenomena. And because they're ignorant of this emptiness, free from all conceptual elaborations, this true nature of phenomena, they grasp to true existence. And the first thing they grasp to is an I, a self. They think I. And what is the basis for the grasping to a self or to an I? It's the 5 aggregates. So taking the 5 aggregates as the basis, one thinks I. And then the second step is that once one grasps to an I, a self, then one also starts grasping to the mine, what belongs to me. And so these initially very subtle graspings due to a lack of knowledge, the not knowing of the nature of things, one reinforces this grasping to an I and to the my. So first grasping to the 5 aggregates, one thinks I, and then based on that, then one thinks, okay, this is then my eye, this is my nose, this is my ear, this is my hand, this is my leg, this is my friend, this is my family, this is my house, this is my country, this is my place. All of these different ideas of mine, and coming along with that, also the idea of other. So if there's a mine, then there's an I, then there's also an other. That comes forth like gradually, or that is being propelled through that grasping to an I in the first place. So the first initial thing is ignorance, is not knowing, and then based on that come the other afflictive emotions. Based on that, we get attached to everything that belongs to me, to the I, everything that is in discord to that, we have aversion to. So everything that's harmful, we have aversion to. And then gradually all the afflictive emotions of jealousy, competitiveness, pride, and so forth, they come from that.
So, any that the nation at the Tosum Migring over Lasoba, tension the Chaba Katanji Shujan Rochene Neranga Rangi Shodan Zola Jene Chaba, Shendang, Shenju Zola Jene, Hedang, the number that in it, Cheshire Royondu, Rangjoji, Cheju and Dinduzoma, Tony does an Nagaje, Shenji Cheju and Dinduzol on the Miso Bejan, Tado, Kienle around how to talk on Yam Jensen. Then the Chen and the Dito Vian, Lunga Yusum, the Led Amanda, such a Casore, Led and Yamon, Kayungur. But then they never Latin and another Corva Latin, Carsor, Mutiny Corgres, Kande Corgre, Namna, Sochin Chanda, Rawan Meba, Sandua, in Mamatuzola, Tromba. Juyungur, Tromba Jenny, shooting the lane, doesn't call Turgodam the Shagadua, Chadam the Shah, Chingdam the Shani, and the Korajamia, Yalro, Mando Shigdua. Dinna Jarawan Mebani, Corolla then, it's in Cordic Dosa. Let on Yomoni Latin, Tonga Jundu. 다 디페든 올라셔 연구도 시즌 다 가와 걸고 이래 감숨 걸어 나래 감숨 걸어 도쇼 디스베 좀 와 마셔 되네 마게 나나가서 그래 내가 나름에 되게 시베 때문에 나름에 버도는 걸어인 로아는 돌아네 닝제 줄고 되란도 닝제 기거 좀선 가래래 살아나 다 하나 nga me bala nga sung ta me ba ta sa tene tene chene tonda me sa la tene kangya mangbo ji nyen ji kyo so do sa ta de la tene jangje sa man nam ye sam je la ning je da ra ma be ke yu lu che sam ji do ning je de la tene te ba chi gi sa ta so jun chun da de do pe do wal khale shu yi no so
all that is considered to pertain to the self, one's I, for example, is in turn assumed to exist truly, and attachment to it is consequently engendered. It is due to this that beings wander helplessly in samsara from the peak of existence down to the hell of torment unsurpassed, as though revolving on an irrigation wheel. Chandrakirti pays homage to compassion for such beings. So, he pays homage to compassion for such beings. Okay, so because of the grasping to the I, then gradually the three poisons arise. They afflict us. So when we grasp to an I, and then subsequently to a mine, and make this distinction between self and other, then we get attached to everything that belongs to one's own side of things. And one develops aversion towards the other. And if one observes the qualities of one's own side of things, so self and that what belongs to oneself, then one develops pride. And when one observes the qualities in the other, then jealousy arises. And comparing those, then competitiveness arises. So in that way, karma and afflictive emotions will be propelled, and one will continuously engender the causes for rebirth within samsara, continuous experience of samsara. And the example that is given here is the turning, the revolving of an irrigation wheel. So in the past, the method of irrigation was that there was a wheel with all the buckets on it, and they would take out the water out of the well. And so we will see the details of this example and how it applies below. But what we first of all, or the main understanding we need to gain here, is that because of continuous engagement in afflictive emotions and karma, then we suffer. Beings within samsara suffer. And where do they suffer? They suffer within the entirety of the three realms of existence. So the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. And so that is all encompassed by everything between the peak of existence, the highest of the formless realms, and the hell of torment unsurpassed. So the lowest of the lowest hells, the most painful of the hells. And so towards all those sentient beings, the Bodhisattva develops compassion. And why? Because these beings, they grasp to self where there is no self. And that is the fundamental cause for all their suffering within samsara, the continuous suffering within samsara in all the different realms of samsara. And observing that, then compassion just automatically arises. And so Chandrakirti here pays homage to this compassion that arises towards those suffering sentient beings.
da chedar sojun kyumadan dana sojun chendan daw kanejin relam na asa te thakpe thamadan dawar chuji jede lenyun ji thakpe che thamadan da tonda men do do chi hen do tamzul do de dazul de ta sojun de la thakpe damne sha yu ba daw narang sol la le da nyomong be tam yu res ta di cheba jira zo nipaden tulukor korken dan dawla namshe di kyobala rale badan juba ta tulukor di kor magor di mi korken yegen la rale garo korken ji ya kor sono chu ya ten ma den ji taba pa den su den jena en kor jugro wa di na ne namshe ji chawa che ma ji ma namshe ji ya ju ma ju yula sung ma sung zema da ma che ma je ne ba che ju da namshe la ra la ge re ne namshe ji ni chawa che ma ji yin sa ne sumba de korwe chamba chambo sizine nar mepar dungal sabla parme do pemba nas oya da korwe ta sojun jingoba de den kasora takba dan chu langsa den chamba na ma yu ya lang ma yu de che yongro ni tin na shen ngaso ni di korule da nyomong ba to ge ni khora na la kaduna yu bare kaduna sasa bare dila kaduna tharnyu me bare asa patamba desun de sona.
The image of an irrigation wheel to describe the situation of living beings is appropriate in 6 ways. So here the explanation looks at 6 different ways that this is actually a really good example that for the situation of sentient beings. This irrigation wheel is a wheel that takes out the water out of the well. And so it's the situation of samsara, of sentient beings in samsara, is like that kind of irrigation wheel in 6 ways. The first one, like buckets tied to the wheel with ropes, beings are bound tightly by the strings of their karma and defilements. So beings will continue to be reborn in samsara and suffer in samsara because of karma and afflictive emotions, karma and defilements. And so karma and afflictive emotions are what binds us to this continuous turning wheel of samsara, just like the buckets are bound to the wheel. Second, the driving force of consciousness is like a person turning the water wheel. So in order to take out the water from the well, there actually needs to be a person who pulls the wheel, that keeps it in motion. And so a person is pulling ropes and so forth to keep the wheel in motion. And since our rebirth within samsara depends on the grasping to existence, the one that propels the movement of the wheel, the figurative wheel here, is consciousness, the grasping consciousness. It's a driving force for rebirth within samsara. And then third, samsara resembles a deep well from the peak of existence to the hell of torment unsurpassed, a fathomless abyss down which beings are constantly hurled. So when the water is taken out of the well, the buckets are always thrown back into the well and then they come back out, right? And so it's very easy for the buckets to be thrown into the well and then they need to be taken out again. And so samsara is similar to the well, or that process here, because beings can always fall back into the lower realms. They are constantly whirled within samsara, was ready to fall into the abyss of samsara, of the hell realms and so forth.
Turdo ngenro ngangi doshin kendo nro kendo derur bebe tangro badang sojadwa te chunala chomba ji chala te chu tula ma rogo na kala chama khorma sa rogwa ya kenle tendu te skala je yure tena jang azo sibizamena ma sa go na ko samjen yarangchin kari ma tarang la jana lenyon nangchin ki che rogre nu khora da ngasu ngamam shu tong ma sa rogre ta ko dendro lada me da lazo ba de ya go je to bo yo na ane ke wa che te pa pa kala mo bo cha go do asa dina je les chi je nga ba da mari selen so selen ni nyoma ba da do je si be le da na ma do ji ku no nyoma ba sum yo ja sa ta nga zo an korola che sul ji tende yana chu ni ngona sam la da na ane mari se ba lemba sum de so nyomon to na shere döje da siban yedu so legone shere thama sumde ne lende rewu tone ya da nyomo ni jen rewu ki nyomo bo sawwa de mone sumdi khorala to yun so rumbu ta thami yun ma cha ba de khor de do asa de sumde nga je khor je ba tha je do ngebar me sama ta rimba ta ba yor sam de ngeba ka yo mare ta kan da me da ro mi sam ba de da chik je chik che so chik jugbe 파르메 방 갈메도 다 간다르 견제 매바 거랑 거를 겨우가만 전에 치마 전에 다 그냥 지드네 간다 때네로 주니데 춘네 거를 래 마다네 되네 에진 코르데 요래 맨난가 방 가서 갈메 콜로 코로 나신제네 코로를 균매체 마 코르데도 와스 디아니 내년 데우숨 되네 코르데 요래 다 데우 용이 핀 베카블라 녀모 바케기레 양 레사버저사 그래 내가 사실 megabla nyomong ba dan le din ta manda ngeba me ba ni korte gere se be jare ke da so jun ya de ne ko ni te gro ba sa ni nyima re shin tungal ji tungal da juru tungal da chaba du ji tungal sum chunyer da da wan nam ji so be sirna chu tun toge so ta thoman na ne chu nyama de ta parma chaba chung de gro chu 롱테오스 교반나 주니얼마든 레비응그레 어양 아주 잘라지 요바다 주니얼마 레비응그레 다 디나진진네 코로라 네베가블 까볼로 동알제 동알 까볼 주르 동알 까볼라 차바 도시지 동알 체중 딱 네바 메라 마도바 동알 파르마차바 예 가려서 거 데네진네 소진 채널로 코고바다 베투 돈에 송난도와 네 심지어 담대네 지는 동안 용태 유래해서 자상 아니 발된 다와라 발라소바 아니 장제사 만남지 섬전나 닝지 계급의 겸선치고 데레서 기대다 아 가르서 우리 차바 디동아적으로 섬전나 매비 닝제 계단도 누수래서 나서
The fourth way that the example of the water wheel applies very well to the situation of sentient beings is the following. Like the buckets fastened to the chain, beings fall down naturally into the lower realms. Whereas they are led upward into higher states only with great effort. So when the buckets are thrown into the well, the water wheel turns and the buckets are thrown into the well, that's actually really easy. They go down very easily, but in order to pull them up again, some effort needs to be exerted. And so it is easy for us, or for ordinary sentient beings, to go into the lower realms. In order to experience the lower realms, one doesn't need to do anything in particular, but following just one's inclination towards karma and afflictive emotions, grasping, having afflictive emotions, engaging in karmic actions accordingly. So it's very easy to be reborn within the lower realms and to really go down within samsara. But it is much harder to be reborn in the higher realms again. So continuous experience of the lower realms is not a problem. It's very easy. Or falling down within samsara is very easy. But being reborn in the higher realms that experience more happiness, samsaric happiness, is actually really difficult. For that, one needs to strive in virtuous actions. One needs to strive in avoiding negative actions, and so on. So that is much more difficult. So in that way, it's same like the water wheel as well. Then the fifth reason is the buckets on the chain are like the 12 links of dependent arising. The 3 of ignorance, craving, and grasping relate to defilement. The 2 of conditioning factors and becoming related to karma, and the other 7, all of which are related to samsaric birth. Of these 3 groups, it is impossible to say which is first, second, or third, for they follow one another uninterruptedly, like a firebrand world in the air. So in the water wheel, we cannot identify one bucket being the first. It's a wheel. It's a continuous movement, and we cannot say which bucket comes first, right? And similarly, beings that suffer within samsara, they're reborn within samsara in the manner of the 12 links of dependent origination. We group them into defilements, karma, and results. So defilements and karma are the causes, then the results are rebirth. The result is rebirth. But so ignorance, craving, and grasping, they're the defilements. Formation and becoming are karma, and the other ones, the other 7, pertain to rebirth. But we can't, so we're having this presentation of the 12 links, but we actually can't say which one of them comes first, because it's a continuous reinforcing cycle that is happening. So when we just think about these 3 aspects, defilement, karma, and rebirth, they reinforce each other, they cause each other. We identify rebirth as the result, but when we are reborn, that leads to further afflictive emotions. That leads to further engagement in karmic actions. So we cannot find the initial one. We cannot say which one is the first one here either, because it's a cycle that continues uninterruptedly. And then finally, the 3 kinds of suffering, the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and all pervasive suffering in the making, are like the waves that day and in and day out ripple the water in the well, endlessly lapping against each other. The suffering that ensues from rebirth within samsara is continuous, sometimes because of circumstances and the kind of karma and afflictive emotions and the intensity of them, the suffering that is experienced is slightly different. So sometimes it's the suffering of suffering, sometimes it's the suffering of change, and sometimes it's the suffering of being compounded that is prevalent within samsara. But so there are these different stages, or different intensities of suffering, but nonetheless, it is continuous, it's always suffering. So day in and day out, suffering is experienced, continuous. There's only a difference in the intensity of suffering that is experienced, the kind of suffering that is experienced within samsara. So that we don't know, that is not certain, but suffering for sure. And so for all of these reasons, Chandrakirti here says that the Bodhisattvas give rise to compassion for sentient beings. So that's his homage to compassion that has beings for its objects, beings that experience this kind of suffering within samsara. So we had a lot of questions from yesterday, so it's probably better we stop here for today.
Also, then Tewa Tangpo de Jambal Shundu Gyurba, Jambal Sekinde, Jambi Yanchipo la, Kwe Ka Jambal Shundu Sekinde Rawa Shundu, Jambi Yanchipo la Kwe Re na, Ni Chanchu Sama Yongzo la Kogre Sungu Yore, Chetan Jambal Yone de Ta, Sanje da Chanchu Sama Yongzo la Sangire, Shundu Sekinde da, Chere Sekila Mere Sanda Ngasu Chetsu Tuku Mare de, Chere Sekida Dodam, Chere Sekida Gyudang, Dendon Lengu, and Juju Langzon number, Shunu number, Kundu Yus and City, Sarbu Tesam Jileg Mare. Chita Shumbi number la Yure, Kombi Kapson, Taku Telecomia Yure La, Chere and your Dodendon La, and Tegu Mebeke Song Songre, Juju Rang number Jani, Shanja Songre. Churura Yambadani, Sal Masal Rogere. Dana Jambal Shonos and Mise Jambayangani, Shushumbo Delin. The Dodins of Malo and the Manja in around Roger. Jambaldi, Samala, Shonu, the Mise Jambian, Jeju Doji Sona Yure. Shambala Mess Labna, there's Shekabure. The six Salburanga Negi Mare. The Jew page is not a young Negri.
Yes. The first question from last week was about the homage to Manjushri. So it says here, homage to Manjushri, Kumara, tender, glorious, and ever youthful. And the question was whether these three adjectives apply to Manjushri specifically and only, or whether they apply to all bodhisattvas. Generally, we can say that the tenderness and the glory, those characteristics, they are not specific to Manjushri only. They can, in the way that we describe those, they can be applied to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And we find them as descriptive of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The youthful, the ever youthful, is a little bit different. I can't really say that this does not apply at all to other Bodhisattvas, but it is usually not, especially not in the Sutra section, it's not so clearly emphasized upon. When we look at the Tantras, for example, if we look at a tantric text that describe the practice upon Avalokiteshvara, then we can find mentions of youthfulness. And we find that as a characteristics, and there are meditations where one visualizes Avalokiteshvara in a youthful form, just as an example. But in his general description, it's not emphasized so much, especially not this 16-year-old appearance. So this is emphasized upon in when Manjushri is described, right? This ever youthful 16-year-old appearance. For other bodhisattvas, we don't find that so much in the sutra explanations or descriptions of the bodhisattvas. But we do find it mentioned in Tantras here and there. So I can't really say it doesn't apply to other bodhisattvas, but it's not in the same emphasis, especially not in the sutras, youthfulness or specifically the 16-year-old appearance. But tenderness and gloriousness, that like the explanation for those two terms, they apply to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
Ni da do de zo da do na ga men do mong bo yong ge re nge den dang don ju do da men de ro do mong bo chin na la ka re song ge re se de jam be yang se de sang ja tham ji chen bi ye xie ji rang su ji de na ba sha jo re se ge re chen re se de se we rang su ne sha ba yin se ge re din de ro chin na ne chang je sa ma na mong bo ji de ro chen che ju don ne xie yong de 거 그런 거는 도모 많이 계시시고 가면 대대스 남바카로 레브 요선 그 제주도 산지 샤마 상만을 요 말에서는 정주 선바 상만을 요 말에서는 내내 랍도 말해 그래서 그 케비 뭐 제주 미세시 나잖아 쓰이 뭐미 제주 셔당 돈에 도전에 계시시고 로즈래도 그래서
In a lot of sutras, there are many different sutras that describe different things. And we find the sutras of the definitive meaning and the provisional meaning. But what we can find in a lot of cases is the statement that Manjushri is the personification or the manifestation of the knowledge of all the Buddhas. And Avalokiteshvara, for example, is the personification, or the embodiment of the love of all Buddhas. And so, in that manner, since they are the embodiment of particular characteristics of enlightenment, then they appear with certain characteristics. They do have specific characteristics or attributes. But we can't really say that others don't have those. They're not like so that those would be exclusive to that particular embodiment, right? So these characteristics can also be shared, because really this emphasizes only different aspects of the same thing, that highlighting a particular quality of enlightenment and the embodiment of that, rather than being completely different things.
아니 대절하다 인제 섬다 니소멜라나 장주지 섬세인데 장주서 만남지 메세다 제절에로 숨는게래 어다데 레데레 장주서 뭐지 제주 장주서 뭐이나 대순데 인지면제 상고거래 다데 뇌바 체중다 슈 체중데 개발요래 지 장주서 뭐이나 인제지로 요고거래 네 니소메블로 요고거래 장주지 섬에 요고거래 되게 전에 대마에 제제다 제대난 나와야네 가르송도 좋아지는라 디 나서 상마라 요요카레베스 있는 건도 유르만 요레베스 다디 양다 까 타마지 드시 잡다다 까 바로 드시 잡도 데스 가가 요레 까 타메 드시 잡다 상마다나 다랑 같이 쉬고 그래 가서는 대화시 본인 뭐 여러 와 대화시 본인 뭐 요zon데 계속 상마 얘는 상대 요레 디 상화되더니 나서 대에서네 검지 전에 열제당는 꼭 광원도 줄줘야 돼 까 바바가서 디 살부랑 송고 말해 매바래라면 매바양 라고 말해요 까 가셔라든 잠바공부지 응원도 견나라 양리 상만의 차비였으면 되네양 까 가셔 동천에 송ገ양 소로지 낭산에 살버쳐라 미송건 로지 현재 견바다 서운도바 기저 상마 여바 살버쳐라 송고 말해 동바 소지는 송로 그래 타마갑서 낭산에 송로 그래 다디까니 시다한테 만들어셔도 까니 술은 득소나 양코 다다 셔그래 대인이 나랑서 상마니 귤라 랑신 동바 인상 대월시 동니 되게 다 오마도 저지 시다로와 다라 연구를 그러니까 담은 선도는 닝제다 니즈멜도 정제선도 요 거고요래 다디 단다 가서 공부데 죄 당도 subject 때문에 죄는 거메라래 모두 바랑신디 냅두고 말해 तेनु सब्जेक्ट हमने चुने कम हमने चाहिए अन्य खाले कोना राजिंदी मोनी जो मुरेस तेरे रोज मुरेस तो जोनी लेन न्याम दो रोज चाबुआ
And then there was another question with regard to this, whether these three characteristics are necessary for all bodhisattvas. Are they really the defining characteristics for someone to be a bodhisattva? These three characteristics of compassionate mind, non-dualistic mind, and bodhicitta. Yes, they are absolutely necessary for someone to be a bodhisattva. They're the causes for a bodhisattva. They are what makes someone a bodhisattva. Of course, their power or their extent might be different within different bodhisattvas, but they are absolutely the crucial defining characteristics for someone to be a bodhisattva. And this leads also into another question, that was whether we can understand these qualities or these characteristics of the compassionate mind, non-dualistic mind, and bodhicitta as being already inherently present within the nature of the mind, and they only need to manifest, they need to be clear, they're already fully there, or are they really something that we need to cultivate? And whether these qualities are already there, and whether the qualities of enlightenment are already inherently present, that there are some different ways of explaining that from the perspective of the second or the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. The third turning of the wheel of Dharma discusses the qualities that are present within the qualities of enlightenment that are already present within the mind of beings, because it speaks about Buddha nature. And so one needs to train in the qualities so that what is already present within the mind becomes manifest. So still, as an ordinary being, one has to cultivate those qualities so that that which lies dormant will manifest. In the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, though, it's not so clearly emphasized, because it doesn't say that these qualities are not present already, but it doesn't really emphasize on those, because as we have seen, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma is concerned with the way things, with the nature of things. And so emphasizing on the empty aspect of phenomena, the appearing aspect is not emphasized on so much. So it's not spoken so clearly about. Doesn't emphasize so much on the qualities of knowledge, love, and ability of Buddhahood, for example. These are all aspects of the appearing, the appearing aspect of things. But in any case, when we follow the idea of emptiness, free from all conceptual elaborations, the mind is empty of an inherent nature as well. And so in the Madhyamaka system, since nothing is truly existent, again, according to the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, these qualities, like these things, compassion, non-dualistic mind, and bodhicitta, they are being developed and cultivated initially, and then they will manifest as qualities as such. So in any case, in the beginning, we need to put some effort to conceptually create or work on developing those qualities, and then they become innate qualities. Yes.
산제다 전주 삼발라 차상로 여상하는 노데데는 오말라 주바데 유르자카소 자마슈노 교말라 차상로 여상다 원베데는 송요 바라와 다디 중전로도 송낭도 인주다 코랑기 중전 엄마도 거래 송낭도 다라래 지존주된 거 방법은 semni ge domba lang keje no bo samla tang da song do keje de kom de samla da pen ya bo samla tang pen ya bo samla tang sa jila ne da de ro domba de kandes ju lo lang go le lang da de de she le song jila de ni domba de song da ta ba xie xin ba yun ju song go de an de ga san so ba de ne kom go de zhen zhe de ne zam go de zo ding yin zhen ne nam zhan dan zhen ne xiu chen bo song xie ra de ne le go ba ga zo le ji jiang ma song 아니 더 정체상 저기 가서 뭐야 띵진기 남냠는 용조 로지 안다 용조 다 간다 정체상 뭐지 파진도 용조 남냠 로지 휴좀 뭐지 된도와 띵나나다 띵진기 용도 시체와 로지 아니 다 제상 아니 그 너네 주 홍도 샤버래 아니 다 오말은 저버디 나라 송다 송구여래 가서 우리 좀 파진 쪽다 파진 쪽 용서 손난 그래 송그래든 된서 사마양 때저 딱저단 제바단 한 디단 쇼촌보 된서 손난 그래 그 검다른 바당 저 돈에 쇼시에차와 많이 봐 검베른 바데 여여 거구로 와 검베르 버저 많이 뭐 그런 송은 나시 따외른 봐서 그러 와 제바 제야지는 봐서는 민도 셔랍 좀 줘야단다는 소송 하모르다 갑주 조바디 셔랍 인도잖아 용기다 저저 망쇼 갑주 조바디래 계저 망쇼 갑주 조바는 시그래 심마상만 용장 갑주 조바디 무슨 망부 송난 거도 와 전주에는 팔 하람 나와 되는 여러 갑주 고바당 개발 냠잖아 먹는 개발 대삼주면도 와 그 쌀돈 쉬에 체중기 개발 양 용유래 대인도에네 권위 개발 때에서는 차인사래스 지금은 셔럽진 라버소 셔바당 지금은 더 띵진이 라버 너가 쉬에 체셔와 때문에 저유래스 나서
And then there was another question with regard to identifying a text as either sutra or as Abhidhamma. So the question was whether the Bodhicharyavatara has the homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas because it's identified as belonging to the Sutra Pitaka, because it mainly teaches the training and meditation, or how to cultivate those qualities. So it's a training in meditative concentration, while the Madhyamakavatara contains the homage to Manjushri because it is mainly concerned with wisdom, and so it belongs to the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And exactly like that, when we look at the Bodhicharyavatara from the beginning to the end, throughout the text, the different qualities, the different aspects that are being cultivated are paid equal amount of attention to. So it starts with the Bodhisattva vow and the qualities of cultivating that, and the benefits, and how one actually generates that, how one cultivates or meditates upon bodhicitta, and then how to uphold the vow, so how to make sure the vow of the bodhisattva, so the bodhicitta, doesn't decline but further increases, and so forth. So throughout the Bodhicharyavatara, it's about cultivating, it's about meditative concentration in the sense of focusing and contemplating in these different ways to emphasize on all the different qualities. So within the entire Bodhicharyavatara, there's only one chapter that focuses on wisdom specifically. But each of the 6 paramitas is paid roughly the same amount of pages or time on when we look at the Bodhicharyavatara. There's no huge difference between the different paramitas and their explanations. That is very different in the Madhyamakavatara, where the 6 paramitas are also taught, but more from the analytical point of view of ascertaining the view. So always it comes back to the view. And the most important is not the meditative stages, the cultivation of these different the different stages of cultivation of meditative concentration, or emphasizing on the meditation upon these different paramitas, but it's more the gradual stages of the view. It's analytical. It has to do specifically with wisdom, and the 6th chapter that is specifically concerned with the wisdom paramita actually encompasses most of the text. So when we look at the amount of time or text that is spent on the other paramitas, it's very, very little compared to the time that is spent on discussing the 6th paramita, the wisdom paramita. The other ones are fairly short. And so it's a question of emphasis. It's not that the Bodhicharyavatara does not teach wisdom. It's also not that the Madhyamakavatara does not teach the 6 paramitas and the gradual approach of practice. But there's a difference in amount, and because the Bodhicharyavatara equally looks at all the different consideration or the different aspects of cultivation, meditating upon the different paramitas equally, then it's identified with the training in meditative concentration, and so it has the homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the Sutra Pitaka homage, and the Madhyamakavatara with its huge emphasis on the wisdom chapter, with huge emphasis on the view is identified as a text belonging to the Abhidhamma.
Also, tene jela kunjen koran bada che songo banda mani je jalse je da sansam songna de re dwala ta de tanda uman juba di shersha deshe chamna disha jen ke je shege yore ninje samna ni zo mela na jangju samne jasanam ne ju so da dilani kunjen koran be je di rewa chi dang 나 제르모제 로산다는 디캅수 계제 셔단 셔샤 제용류 제르모제데 상여서마 용조 돈에 계제 셔제 디 수수제를 당문은 요코도 그래서 존중된 좀 나와야 되네 송나도 남네 디셔샤네 송나로 군년 거란데 존중 값에 셰베 값에 거란 셔단 카레스 디캅수 있나 가서 군소 장제선 계획 유도는 계제 셰그로 와서 디는 그런 가서 소소지원에 해보고 그래서 단다 돈담 장주선 계획이 계획이 해고요. 뭐 저번에 해야 돼. 저도 돈담 장주선 랑 계획이 해고요. 뭐 군소 장주선 이걸로 계획이 해고면 재산사 당문에 해보래서 그런 사람들마다 내내지는 잡을 수 있어요. 마도바 뒤에 벌든 가서 재송가 배지 돈담 장주선 계획이 세디 사당문에 향민나와 되네 말에. 이 공기 향난 게 그래. 나 단다 돈남 장주선 찍고로 거야 많이 야세스도 영조로 거고 그래 엄마 주바지 셔저 장선 소데 가서 그래 돈남 장주선 계획에 이나 양나 단다 계획에 찹샤와 돈이 희고 그래서 조 디살도 좀 손난 거네 어 되네마도 많이 지기 균에 캐밀는 바 되네 말이야 살돈 낭당데 리바 당당데 대해서 러시아서 그래
And there was a question about the different identifications of bodhisattvas. We spoke about Gorampa and Tsongkhapa having different ideas with regard to what is meant here with a bodhisattva. And we really need to look at this particular text, and that's where Gorampa and Tsongkhapa have different idea what this refers to. There's here in the heading it says the 3 causes of bodhisattvas, right? And so Tsongkhapa says here what is meant is the same identification of bodhisattvas as in the Bodhicharyavatara. The Bodhicharyavatara takes the entrance into the path of the bodhisattvas as the basis, the generation of relative bodhicitta. And here the causes for bodhisattvas, you need to understand this in the broad sense of all the different or the different ways of identifying bodhicitta or bodhisattvas. So we need to apply here here what Chandrakirti means is the broad sense, meaning everyone who has given rise to at least relative bodhicitta. While Gorampa says no, the Bodhicharyavatara's identification of bodhisattvas is based on relative bodhicitta. Here in the Madhyamakkhavatara, we are mainly speaking about the ultimate bodhicitta. This is all what it is all about. So also in the homage to the to compassion, like in this section, the homage of the author, what is referred to is the ultimate bodhicitta. It's based. That's what Chandrakirti here refers to. So that is referring to the first bhumi. So here Chandrakirti means the first bhumi. So the different ideas of Gorampa and Tsongkhapa are based on or are the different interpretation of this very statement, or this bodhisattva here that is mentioned in the text. So there, Tsongkhapa has this idea that it's referring to generally everyone who is giving rise to at least relative bodhicitta, while Gorampa identifies it as someone needing to be a bodhisattva on the first bhumi onwards with ultimate bodhicitta. It's not that Tsongkhapa would not recognize ultimate bodhi, the way of identifying a bodhisattva as someone who has given rise to ultimate bodhicitta. It's not that he doesn't acknowledge that kind of categorization at all, nor does Gorampa say the Bodhicharvatara is wrong. It's just here specifically, who's meant here with Bodhisattva. That's where they have these different opinions.
Also, ni xianmen yulo sanyi da tenpa de sa to pal ma do ge ge ma re be san ge jang wa de ja je jang ya ba yo ma re ta sa dang bo to ba ne son de xianmen yulo sanyi ma de ge ba de ne ge to ba cha ba nge jan zo su su ge ba ga la ge ha jang kha bo ro wa ge mi se ba san de ne ma re dang ba ma zo ta ju ju de zo na la da xian jie wa da xian nyam ba da be xian jie wa zhen ba san de ne ko me le yin du su su ge wa ga san de zu 정말 전에 용미도 봐 미스바 말해 무슨 용 가버래 되는 말도 뭐 타지도 내가 이렇게 좀 말해서 그래서
Another question was whether a true altruistic mind, a true altruistic mind can only arise from the first bhumi onwards. And there's no definitiveness in this, but that it's only from the first bhumi onwards. To really give rise to an authentic altruistic mindset, it might happen before, but it's very difficult. And for someone on the first bhumi, that's then a given that this has been developed, this altruistic mindset. So a bodhisattva on the first bhumi for sure has this authentic, true altruistic mindset. Before that, it is not impossible to have an altruistic mind, but it's very, very difficult. So if one is really to practice the different stages of meditation upon an altruistic mind, that, for example, the Bodhicharvatara speaks about, with first practicing the equality of self and other, then the exchange of self and other, and finally cherishing others more than oneself, one can develop an altruistic mind, but it is very, very difficult. So it is possible to have it prior to the first bhumi. It's just rare.
no so tienen de jala kunzo na donam ju ko ro ne mi kunzo sa din kanera donam ming da go be jumzan de rabje choba na pe sal ba ya bo le bire ti so na so le shin ke je ho.
So then there was a question with the terminology of the relative and the ultimate truth, and what they refer to. The terminology there is, and this will become very, very clear when we reach the 6th chapter. So let's be patient for now. Let's go slowly and let's talk about that when we discuss it in a lot of detail in the 6th chapter.
Tene George Chik de Landik the Jishu Sadon Dawaj and it is a lot. Jawsonga Bada, Kunji Mevarum Buji, Tony Dangala Cheval.
Come very, very clear when we reach the 6th chapter. So let's be patient for now. Let's go slowly and let's talk about that when we discuss it in a lot of detail in the 6th chapter.
Tene George chik di lendik tenji shu sadang tawa chi ane deji la jiao songa pa dang kunye mi pa rumbu chi ji ni tongni da dang wala kebar yore yu ma res ta do dang la kebar yore ngo la da kebar yore ma shu dang ji tongni chik yin biru wa ta tong uma sekan di rang la jeshi keb na te si kebar yore te kasa uma nge long ji zhangi di kun jiao songa be yue je cha wane tachigo me je cha wane tachigo yuminyi ta kāngla mi neba uyu la neba wasan, di chini u nidu sana yuminyi la mayimba uyu la neba wasan, dine di khirsha chini dren nangiri, tsik di tes. Mewa rumba shiki di rede uyu la ne, sidu sana neba di tsik di dreshe jamba che na kuwa lok dho nyanga dosa, uyu ki zimba di yueba dhoju kuwa lok kuwa dosa res. Uyu la ne sidu nebe neba di tsik di nyam dendang sama dhoba dondo di ne san kogo ma res. Kasa lurukki kebe uilan neba yongmi je sana songshan di tsula langu res. Tupe tatam jan chola nelu la nyambara shaa sido sana zindang ki kone shaa bachila laya maro waasa. Zimba dan chalwa kala laga res yore. Ta songa pe donde derang sungu yore de sik peche tangda koni la te etes mi lao yore. Hane tega nashi ta oo maa raju chupa kapsa ta derung di kwa la nga zo shee mangbo yore. Gaba ta sungdang da mega da mayinga di namsha chedang di zo 야 조선은 혼자니 공부를 쳐버 가야 요 말에 식 배조당도 면도 빼 먹고 요래 뒤에 들어가서 라지로 가서 이거라 라고 시행이 맞아.
And another question was to briefly talk about the differences between the way that, and whether there are differences in explaining the ultimate between Tsongkhapa and Mipam Rinpoche. Yes, in the way that the ultimate is approached, the way that they explain it, there are differences. There are slight differences. The essence that they're trying, the nature of phenomena that they're trying to describe is similar, but there are slight differences in approaching the topic of it and teaching it. So Tsongkhapa, for example, says, and I think I already quoted this once before, the existence is an extreme, non-existence is also an extreme. To abide within the middle, that is neither existence nor non-existence, that is the ultimate. So a middle between, so Tsongkhapa describes the ultimate as being the middle between existence and non-existence, and Mipam Rinpoche says that that kind of wording is actually dangerous because it might lead to a grasping to a middle, that there would be something between existence and non-existence. That kind of wording would again lead to, like, can make someone grasp, even though the meaning expressed is the same as Mipam Rinpoche expresses it when saying, learned ones do not abide even even in the middle. What he means is that the emphasis lies in not having any kind of grasping, and to make sure that the one who's led towards the understanding of the ultimate does not grasp to anything, to any kind of existence. And so we will see in the 6th chapter a lot of very subtle differences. We will see the different refutations, the refutation, the non-exist, the refutation of existence, the non-implicative negation and the implicative negation, and all of those, so the Megak and the Mayingak. And we will see the different wording that is used by the different scholars and the differences in how they describe the ultimate. And there are many, many differences in the words. They do all lead, though, or they all describe the same essential meaning. But there are differences in the way it's approached in explanation. Lesser. So this is probably all for today, all the questions we had. And please recite a dedication aspiration prayers with me.
Sonam de damje sevani tone nyebe dana damje ni yega naje balam drobai sebe zole drovaraju chanju zenjo remboji maje banam je jorji keba nyama mema Kone kondo belvaraju jamba bawe jeda demano kondo sambo deya dejene dodo gonye jesu dodu kewa nida damje ramdongo laso ni sama gozo doje na sanye jayong
도시체 상제령 캠프
Can't unmute myself. Oh, now my voice is back. Couldn't unmute myself. Khenpo was in the end saying, take good care, everyone, and see you tomorrow. And I would like to remind you that the quiz is open right now. So the quiz about the last 2 weeks' material has been posted this morning, I hope. And it will be available for 24 hours, so everyone can fill it out at one point. And I made some changes over the weekend. So not in terms of what you have to do, but if you look at our team, I put to-do lists. And that indicates where you find things. So we're in week 3 now, so there should be a to-do list on your general page telling you exactly what you expected to do, and just make sure the only time-sensitive thing is the quiz. So please do that today, but then you have a list of things to do, like all the things that that are important for this week. So that, and I have started to indicate where in the review class recordings we're addressing which topic. So if you want to look up a particular topic, you can just look at the list of review classes and then see the timestamp, and you don't need to listen to everything but the topic that you probably want to listen again to. So yeah, those are the things. I hope the team, the way that it is organized now, is a little bit easier for you to follow, especially with the to-do list on the general channel. Okay, that's all. Good luck on the quiz.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.